Today's event is held in June to mark World Environment Day, which was 2 days ago, June 5th, and it's also, June 5th is also Arbor Day, which was founded in Greytown. So we put together this event with the panelists, and it was actually initiated by Michael Woodcock, who unfortunately had a little bit of an injury and he cannot attend today, but we're carrying the torch on his behalf. Michael Woodcock is chair of the recently founded Live Like the River Charitable Trust, which is a lovely organization that brings people into the bush to reconnect with nature. So we have 3 presenters today. Pat White will be joining us by Zoom, and he will be first up. He's a poet who used to live here in Wairarapa and has been working with nature themes in all of his work. Kerri McGill, originally from Boston, will be here live today, a painter, and she'll be presenting second. And last is Raihānia Tipoki, who I'm very grateful drove many hours today from the East Coast to be able to join us live, so thank you so much. I'm very pleased to hand over the session to Gareth Winter, who you probably know was recently awarded the Queen's Service Medal for his services to historical research. So very glad Gareth can be the moderator. So we'll start up with Pat White.
Tēnā koutou katoa. It's a privilege to be part of this discussion today on the spirit of the environment. My name is Pat White and I live near Fairlie, a South Island town of less than 750 people near the man-made lake of Puha and overlooked by mountains to the north, east and west. I'm a South Islander by birth and by nature. Born at Tapanui, much of my life has been spent in relating to the land, fishing, hunting, farming, tramping, and just being with it one way or another. My work as a poet and painter has a central concern: the way in which humans are part of the land rather than in charge of it. This conditions what I have to say about the spirit of the environment. In thinking what may be worth saying in 12 minutes or so that relates to the topic, I immediately came up against a stumbling block. I'd have to use words to do so. We can use images and words to try getting closer to an understanding of what we are as part of nature. A lifetime spent doing so has left me feeling the insufficiency of the way we use words or images to tackle such a task. Words arise from the environment, are in fact, they are part of it. For a start, I accept that language is site-specific, and although I spent some time learning to speak Maori, I don't use it to write. That is another issue worth talking about, but outside the brief for these few minutes. Regardless, sharing some thoughts and poems, we'll see if there is something to be teased out of these few words. Here is a poem from Watching for the Wingbeat, new and selected poems. And this is from the Valdemar Notebooks, number 37. If poetry is something like sound, on the morning that I went walking to seek out words, The tide washed against rock walls. Somewhere a cock quail crowed. Wind fell about laughing in Manukau. Gulls and herons sang their dissonance across the wash of a launch. Then poetry is also something like silence. Echoes of conflict fade as first flame wraps around newspaper in the grate. Leaves fall unseen in my absence. There is a rabbit lying by the drive. Words strain to pull a full moon through dusk, up over the tide. I take out hearing aids at night and hear blood pushing in my ears. To some people, the environment can be a political argument. To others, a cause their group may engage with, may be a source of solace to an individual, a place to supply food in some cases, and as we have seen this week in the news, the environment can be a place to get lost in. Primarily, it is a place we share with the multitudes of beings that rise from within it to live and die as part of the great continuum. We enter a session like this with certain cultural expectations, and it is my view that instead of providing those answers, we could be profitably employed finding questions to ask of each other, even of the world that surrounds us. Instead of our telling, what would happen if we listened to an audience? The audience for this talk, the audience that is the environment beyond our four walls. We could, with some humility, discover what the other might know, collectively, what we don't know yet. What does the word environment even mean to each of us here today? The word's etymology is interesting, coming from Old French, meaning the area surrounding urban dwellings. Does it mean more than that these days? Another poem, this one's a new one, called Stoned. Pounamu can polish until grain is a landscape one finds in the mind. Some schist fragments metamorphose into pages telling their own stories. Greywacke fractures on impact with flame, a fragility the heart also owns. Fossils bind together the taste of hilltops in a limestone sea floor. She picks up stones to put on a shelf where there are no words reminding her. Stones have their own stories to tell. Listen. Listen. If you can join me in a brief moment of wild idealism, a great leap of faith would be to find leaders, speakers, and environmentalists, and opponents to environmentalists, who are prepared to go forward together as co-discoverers and learners, rather than one group proving their ego and argument is more persuasive than another. We are small animals whose actions, because of our numbers, have big impacts on our environment. Often, our actions are supported by words that are founded on beliefs rather than wisdom. Like the word environment, belief and wisdom are big words we could use more cautiously and inclusively. I believe the natural environment provides for my bodily needs, but more importantly is what it does to enrich me spiritually. In city and country, among mountains, or in meadows cultivated across the flats. I'm sure all of you today agree that our best efforts are seen in our ecological footprint, what we do in or for our own environment, rather than the words we use to talk about it. I'd like to finish with a poem, or close to finish. So many love poems. Light enters every corner, activating shadow. You stir in ways I'd like to remember long after coffee's first tang has faded from the tongue. Quail crow another day into action, and wind moves as if fences lack understanding of territory, where tree trunk and new leaf both move like ghosts, blanket of grey tints. Lit branches and the promise of hay in every ripe, rippling ryegrass seed head. You move in both memory and moment. You gather me up with the knowledge of years shared and intimacy as close as mingled sweat, touch of the foot's sole or the shoulder's ache. If your eyes would open, their reflection carried to mine would be the sky's promise, the wind's guarantee of high cloud, one day or another. You know things I will never have time to learn. What's more, it is easy to see you knew before me that today could be the day of leaving. Not that you intend for 1 minute to take yourself anywhere or tomorrow. Water will wash and wind will wear at your edges. So you are in one instant both absence and presence, riddle of what once was and what will be. And I have lived in your arms after dark, and at dawn wept for you. My brief stay will not alter your course. Already new growth lies in seed and soil, neither waiting for me nor because of me. They know you already more intimately than I ever could have enfolded myself in your flesh. Yet my clumsy steps, bloodied hands, they tried to love this place you are. Thank you very much to Wai Word, to the individuals who have enabled this event to take place, to my fellow speakers from whom I could learn a lot. Thank you to those who have joined as an audience. As H.D. Thoreau famously said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." Thank you.
Fionna, thank you, Pat, if you can hear us. I think you can actually pick up from Pat's presentation that he was born and spent a lot of time in the South Island. There's a sort of a robust openness from his work. He now lives in Fairlie-based. I think he was born in Tapanui, so he's an Aotearoa, right? And his work has been published and exhibited regularly since 1976, and some of you will remember a big exhibition at Aotearoa, a work that concentrated on an ancestor's death at Gallipoli and the correlation between the landscape at Gallipoli and the landscape in coastal WAIRARAPA. A massive work that Pat did. The next speaker is Kerri McGill. Kerri is a painter and scenic artist, so she's been involved in working in film and no doubt theatre. She's the New Zealand Pacific Studio 2020 Marsden District Fellow, so that fellowship that's supported by the Marsden District Council. Kerri's fellowship's probably extended a little bit on what she originally thought it was going to happen. COVID got in the way, and so she was blessed by being able to stay longer in WAIRARAPA and explore our landscape. A lot of her work is on a landscape and the larger themes of the changing environment. And her art practice is mixed media, map collages, dreamscapes that she describes as poetic observations of humanity. Some of you will have read stories about Kerri recently in media, local media, and also was interviewed last week, broadcast last week on national radio. So that was a fantastic interview, by the way. So Kerri's going to speak to us now.
For those of you who have not met me yet, come to chat con art with me. My name is Kerri McGill, and as Gareth said, I am an artist from the US, from Boston, Massachusetts, and I found my way here through New Zealand Pacific Studios. And today I have an overview of my work. So you're going to see from the very beginning to where I am now. And you'll see that I really lean on every aspect of our natural world. I take it in as part of my visual language because our environment is a shared language. And no matter where you're from, you'll recognize things. There'll be symbols of things. You'll have a personal relationship. So as a visual artist, it's very important for me to find that connect. And I consider my paintings not just an object, but a space of thought. I want you to be able to be in front of that painting and find different levels of these natural symbols. And I'm really happy to follow Pat White. I love that he mentioned people are part of the land, not in charge of it. And that is definitely an ideal I share. So what is our relationship to the natural world and how does it define us? So, you know, there are people who will say, oh, well, we're all part of the natural world. We're born of this larger thing and we can't help but be influenced by it. And someone will say, nature, yeah, I'm on my nature once a week. And they're both legitimate because that's the relationships one might have. As far as I'm concerned, I grew up in a small town in the hills. And as a child, my mom and I would go trekking and we'd go bird watching and stargazing. And so from a very early age, I learned that if you are still and you observe and listen and you are patient, there's a payoff. There's that shooting star. There's that hidden bird that comes out into view. There's a path to the top of the mountains. Nature opens up to you if you spend time with it. And that little secret moment is such a little payoff. And I really strive to get that type of feeling in my paintings as well. Like you kind of stumbled upon something that's a private moment. And as far as nature goes, there are so many themes that an artist, a writer, musician, so many things we can work with. And they're all aspects of things that we go through in our own personal lives on a much larger level. So, I mean, you could just start with beauty, and you could spend your whole life just using nature's beauty as a subject and be completely satisfied. But there's strength, there's growth, there's destruction, and there's rebirth. There's rhythms, seasons, tides, and migrations. And the continual change of nature coincides with the idea that while it creates expectations with rhythms, it also breaks your expectations through its change. And one that I really love toying with is this idea that the space of a place can affect your sense of time and space. The environment is beyond huge, and something that Pat White mentioned is that we are such small animals. And sometimes you forget that because we live in a society that is built to fit us. And to break away from what you're familiar with, our little cities or towns, and to go into these large spaces, it readjusts how you connect and how you fit into everything. Especially in New Zealand. Boston has mountains and hills, but wow. I thought they were big. But so it was great. It really struck me in New Zealand. It was really something that I had to think about as a visual artist, how I was going to respond to that. And I'm ahead of myself here. Thank you. So in the grandness of the environment, I'll choose single elements, because even single elements have multiple readings. And depending on your personal relationship with the symbols, you know, like as an example, the red deer antlers, they're wonderful. They're wonderful as just an organic shape. You don't even have to go beyond that. But if you're a historian or if you're a hunter, you're going to approach the aspect of antlers with a different background. And the ideas of wildness, colonization, life, death, sustenance, you know, what nature provides. People are going to have many different readings from the same thing. So this is the beginning of my painting experience. What I was looking for that visual connection with other people. So a shared symbol that you can relate to. In developing a personal language within my painting. So I started off with beauty, the beauty of nature and flowers, but I didn't approach them as a still life. I approached them as portraits. So it was something beyond just a visual, like what was underneath that. And giving the idea that these little things that, you know, they're beautiful, but there's something maybe more to them and how we approach them. And I moved on to birds and animals. And this is another level of using nature as a symbol. A lot of animals have meanings as symbols and cultural significance that are recognizable for different things. They can stand in for people. They add dimension to narrative. And the types of images explore our relationship and how we relate with the animals and the nature. Are they part of our personality? Are they part of the narrative explaining something on a different level? And, another one. Okay. And something that was not mentioned in themes, but is definitely an interesting part of the natural world as compared to our society, is the absence of right and wrong and the ambiguity in nature. And the environment is made to live and sustain itself and keep on going. Everything in our world is built to live, and it's only people, our type of animal, that sees, you know, fertile crops as a reward and storms as a punishment. But everything in its collective is based on this working system, and it's all about living. And with all of our turmoil and what we're going through, we have to remember that no matter what we do to the earth, and no matter what happens to us, the earth and the natural world will survive on some level. And if we want to talk about standing up for the earth and the environment, it's only because we want to live here a little bit longer. But everything in this world is built to survive, and it will survive us as well. And taking the idea of the natural symbols into talking about urban landscapes. The urban landscapes, the first one is a marketplace, and this is from my experience in Dubai. When I was working in Dubai, and there are many levels of, it was the closest I'd ever been inside a caste system. And that's the simple symbolism of the birds on the bottom, the caged birds and the free birds. And that was just my way of talking about the expanse of the politics I felt there. And I also use personification. So the middle one is Buenos Aires, which was another very overwhelming experience. My Spanish is not good, this city is enormous, and I was terrified at becoming lost and not being able to get my way back home. It was a beautiful city, it was wonderful, and it was just a little too much. This is a hand-drawn map, and you'll see the faces of the horse, and the name is City as Beast. And so that brings the power of a natural animal into the city to give the viewer an idea of the palpableness of that. And the third is actually, this deals with the idea of size. This is based on the LA fires, the wildfires that took over a lot of western US. And just the idea that you can have an enormous city, but if something happens in the natural world, it will tell you just how small an animal you are very, very quickly. And that brings us to the space as far as when I arrived here. And like I said, oh, I thought I had mountains. I spent 2 weeks in the South Island, and it readjusted everything. The space you feel here, it just keeps opening up, and it keeps reminding you just how small you are on the rest of this planet. And the time is an ancient time. We structure our time with, we structure our physical lives. It's based on, okay, we live this long, and here's our education, and here's our job, and here's our family. And then if you walk into the mountains and you walk into places, especially in New Zealand, you feel this ancient history. You can't avoid the fact that there are markings that, you know, everything this land has been through. And it's an honor to be on this land while it's above the sea. It's an amazing thing. And so these are some of the map collages. And the map is a nice way to talk about the concepts of how we try to organize our space and how we try to graph things out and make sense of something that is perpetually changing and evolving. And it carries the idea that beyond the canvas is my hope. So it just carries beyond that. And this is based on the Aotearoa range, and these are other works that I've made while I'm here. The painting on the top left is On the Way to Hawke's Bay. So I'm trying to find a way to talk about this space here. So the repetition of the hills, which turned into abstract, gives you the idea of the perpetual repetition and change of the hills. The hills of Wairarapa uses the small, tiny house that fits right in. And these are things that you're probably very familiar with. And maybe you wouldn't think twice about it. But I'm here from a place where, you know, we have small little towns and you know, a nice little city. And to see a tiny house in the enormity of all of this space, it means so much to me. It talks about the strength of the person in the environment, and it creates that relationship to think about. And then the cliffs of Castle Point, the tall one on the right, talks about the ideas of actual plate movement. It's all about motion, about how the earth is being pushed up from the ocean. And as I spend time really thinking about this place and this space, a wonderful thing happens. I become familiar with things. And so all of a sudden I have new ways, new visual symbols I can use that people are familiar with here, but I held off on painting birds until I found out who your birds were. And I saw a million bird paintings, and I love birds, but I'm like, these are new birds, but I know a tui, and I know that if I put my little tui in that painting, everyone who knows what a tui sounds like and knows what morning sounds like, that is going to instill a sound in that painting. And that familiarity is a wonderful byproduct of being stranded here, and I am very, very grateful. And that also led to this aspect of the mountains and the hills that I kept trying to grapple with, kept trying to portray. And I finally realized that this landscape, it's beyond the size, it's beyond what it looks like. They have the hills have elements of being underwater. It has markings of the ocean. It encapsulates the ancient time that we were talking about as part of that, because you're seeing history with you. And it has that motion still carved into it, as if the waves are still crashing around it. And so I tried to capture that in these newer paintings, just getting this idea of motion in something that most people portray as a very solid piece of the landscape. And as an artist, I do have to look at what I'm doing, especially as an artist from the US, and I have to ask myself, what am I doing? How is this helpful to anyone? I make these paintings for other people. I paint because it's part of my thought process and it's part of what I do. And I want people to get something out of them. And if you do the last one, I realize that everything I draw from in nature and the life that we're talking about, there's joy in life, and bringing joy to the paintings, to really get it into the paintings properly so people can look at my paintings and see that joy. That is important, especially now. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation, Kerri, and it's wonderful for us to see someone else, see our land through someone else's eyes. It's a chance for us to see it fresh. I love the idea of Marinus Mountains. Our next speaker is Raihānia Tipoki. Raihānia is of Ngāti Hine Hika and Ngāti Hine Pēhinga on his father's side, and everything else on his mother's side. Irish, English, Italian, everything. Raihānia has a farming background from both sides of his family, and for many years Raihānia has sought rural knowledge both in Aotearoa and abroad. He's now back in Pirinoa, where he was raised. He discovered while living in London that his Māori culture was more valued than the world told him through his upbringing. He returned to Aotearoa and pursued his culture at Victoria University, graduating with a BA in Te Reo Māori and a BSc in ecology, which is a fantastic combination. He is one of the most experienced waka haurua captains in Te Moana Nui Kiwa, and is passionate about helping people understand who they are. After learning and seeing the effects of colonisation on Indigenous peoples worldwide, Raihānia is driven to create opportunities for Indigenous people to return to full health, but more importantly, full control of their destinies. And I guess that implies a fuller control of their environment as well. Raihānia.
Tēnā tātou te whare. Thank you, Kerri and Matua Pat, for helping me find what I'm going to talk about today. I too benefited from the lockdown, the stillness, when the hum of society fell quiet. I think our ability to converse with that side of us, the natural side, was enhanced. And thoughts came more easily. So, kei te mihi ake au ki a coronavirus ma tērā. Oti rā ki te whare e tūnei tēnā koe, ki te mano o te whenua, tēnei kame, ki a koe rāwiri, me ngā hapu kai a koe, tēnā koe e te mano o tēnei whenua. Me ngā koe iwi kai a kai roto i te kōpū a papatua anu koe e mauana. I te taha taku māma, ko ngā atu Pākehā nui tonu te iwi, i te taha taku pāpā, heuri tani whāhau. So, when Maui, also if I forget, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm here in body, possibly not spirit, as I've been gallivanting around the North Island, Tika Maui for the last 10 days. And I travelled from Aotearoa last night to Waipukuro, stayed in a motel, which I never do, and then made my way down here. I'm really happy to be here and very thankful to be a part of this kaupapa, so thank you very much for having me. When our tipuna Maui came down these ways and fished up Te Ika Maui, the North Island, he managed to capture on the whenua some of the descendants of Tangaroa, two of whom I especially connect or descend from. Their names are Hinekorako and Ruamana. Two taniwha, brother and sister, they were stranded on Te Ika Maui because the hook went in, according to our story, at Te Reinga, not the Te Reinga up north, the Te Reinga north of Te Wairoa, the northern Hawke's Bay. When you look at Hawke Bay, Te Matau a Maui, koina Te Matau a Maui, that is the fish hook of Maui. When Maui hooked the fish, it was a foul hooking. It didn't go in the mouth, obviously, because anei ke te waha, anei ke te karu. The Matau is Hawke Bay. When you look at the map, you can see the hook. And the hook went into the whenua, to the side of the fish, and it came out at Te Reinga. Right at the base of my mountain, te whakapunake o te Matau a Maui tiki tiki a Taranga. Basically the foul hooking of the hook of Maui. And so these my two taniwha were stranded up the Huiaro range, northeast of Maunga Pohatu, and they yearned for the ocean. They yearned for the ocean, and they resolved one day to get to the ocean again. And so they had a race. Hinekorako was female, Ruamanu male, and they raced to get to the ocean, Te Whanganui a Ruawhara, Hawke Bay. Ruamanu being the male, he didn't really care about which way he went, he just stumbled head over foot, tail, and bumbled his way and created the Ruakituri River. The Ruakituri River that flows south-east of Maunga Pohatu. And Hinekorako carved out the Hangaroa, which meanders north, east, west, south, all the way down to a little place called Te Reinga, where she rested and combed her beautiful long black hair. And she was quite, feminine, of course. She didn't see her brother coming, rumbling, tumbling down the cliffs, creating the waterfalls and riffles of the Ruakituri. And he passed her while she was there admiring her beautiful self. Ruamanu kept going, and he tumbled and crashed past her, creating the Te Reinga Falls. And the rest of Te Wairoa, Hōpupu, Hōmenengene, Matangira, all the way up to Te Whanganui a Ruawhara. Both of them, either themselves or their descendants, ended up marrying into the migratory people who are our other side of us. So this is the taniwha, the pre-migration whakapapa we have to the whenua. And they married into the people that came on the canoes, such as Kurahopu, Porota, Tākitini. So I descend from these two taniwha, one which married my ancestor in Pirinoa, a descendant of Ruapari from the Horota, and one Tānia, you may know Tānia as Tānia of the reef, or Tānia that became a reef. She married another man from I guess the Ahuiri area, nature area, and all of us down here descend from, at least from her, Tānia, and probably from Hinekora too. So, I'm a taniwha by blood, farmer by trade, sailor by fluke, businessman by accident, poet by chance, activist by nature. And it would be remiss of me to not use this opportunity to talk a little bit about a kaupapa that has sprung up many times before and is right in front of my face now, with the RMA being fast-tracked to enable some big projects. And no apologies for using this as a political, because I am an activist and you said so. So I've been writing about why we shouldn't be manipulating the whenua, why we shouldn't be manipulating the water, why we should humble ourselves as nature, not just before nature, why we need to see ourselves again as extensions of nature. And whakapapa does that. If you know te ao Māori, if you know Māori people, you will know that whakapapa is everything to us. It tells us, informs us how we relate to every intangible and tangible thing that has ever existed in the universe. So, could you just tell me when I've got like 2 minutes left? I've got the propensity to ramble, I'm sure. Some of you might know that, Chris. Okay, so I've been writing about these things, and as activism, I just see as putting passion into words and letting that naturally materialize into actions. That's kind of my how I see activism. So we all have the opportunity to put our passion into words and let the words materialize into actions. So I got an email from a man called Ian Gunn. I know a number of you in the room know Ian, maybe more than I think. Ian and I probably would have locked horns if he was still at GW when I moved home 5 years ago, but instead we get along very well, and he's got a knack of CCing me into emails. It must be because he knows I'm going to reply all and say exactly how I feel. And he's been sending me these articles about Indigenous knowledge, and I can see he's really inspired by Indigenous peoples, mainly actually in Australia, te whenua moe. So he emailed me this article one time that was called All About the Land, Drought Shakes Farming to Its Indigenous Roots. I don't have time to talk about the article, but I just want to read you my response to one of Ian's many emails. It goes, Tēnā koe Ian, thank you for your emails. Your quest for wisdom fills me with hope that Wairarapa may yet understand how important te ao Māori and all our philosophies are in the collective quest to stem the tide of retribution for our transgressions upon nature, most commonly referred to as climate change. I'm compelled by your interest in Indigenous knowing to share my own understandings with you, as I believe, and have done for some time, that the answers we seek do not lie in the science labs, Crown Institute reports, or university articles. Kei roto kei te hā o tāwhiri mātea, te haruru o Tangaroa, ngā mati hao o Mahuika, te umo o Pāpatuanuku, me te korowai o Ranginui. It takes a paradigm shift which for many may require a decent amount of unlearning to truly understand our relationship with Papatuanuku and Te Aotearoa, is to treat the whenua and water with the respect you afford your ancestors. Ka mutu. Oopsie. Our tipuna have been farming for millennia without chemicals, synthetic fertilisers, or having to manipulate waterways. They worked with nature, understanding the atua know best. You see, the monocultural society in which we live is detrimental to cultural diversity, just as the monoculture of our environment is detrimental to biological diversity. As a cultural minority, we live this every day. Pākehā culture / colonialism, or colonialism, is hyper-visible, only detected by those who recognise the difference between colonialism and indigeneity. Failing to do so, one remains ignorant of that which surrounds them. Until Western science gets down off its high horse and acknowledges what it's been trampling over for centuries, our trajectory as a global community is much like that of a cargo ship caught in a howling southerly in Te Waha o Te Ika Maui, Pausaway. In regards to water storage, Papatuanuku has 3 prominent natural dams, all female: aquifers, parawhenua mea, wetlands, hinei te repo, and yes, the soil herself, all of whom we've managed in fine colonial patriarchal fashion to deplete in record time. And now in our infinite imperialist wisdom, we embark on a greater effort to ruin our mokopuna's future by failing to hear the messages that continue to present themselves. We forge on, descendants of the great pioneering settlers, enamoured by our perceived superiority over the land, which we so proudly broke in under the banner of progress and the advancement of our great civilization. We continue to miss the opportunities to humble ourselves and listen to what our ancestors are telling us. I may have already shared this link about humus with you. It outlines important components to the potential we still have here to join the regenerative agricultural movement that will transform the way we farm and capture great quantities of carbon at the same time. Yes, everyone will benefit. Aku mihi anō Ian, and please, if there is a forum in Wairarapa dedicated to putting nature at the centre of its vision and ready to adapt Indigenous ways of being, let me know. People and groups who have themselves embedded in their vision cannot see past their own lifetimes. Similarly, without understanding where you've come from, you cannot understand where you're heading. I have read the Wairarapa Economic Development Strategy and Action Plan, and the wording throughout is indicative of the Eurocentric ideology that has precipitated our status quo. And anyone who doesn't understand that the status quo is extremely problematic should simply not be taking up leadership positions. I leave with you an excerpt from a book about Indigenous resistance and the doctrine of discovery. It is key to understanding our inherent supremacy disorder that plagues Papatuanuku and all her descendants. Aroha nui. I CC'd in pretty much everyone that was associated with the proposed Wakamoiko Dam in that email, and still looking for supporters. So yeah, if you know how to get in contact with me and you'd like to be involved, please reach out. Yeah, I'll finish with a poem, because I have time. This is so we went up to the Wakamoiko stream, basin, valley, and just to sit and listen and see what pieces of wisdom we might get from sitting on that whenua. And I wrote this poem the night after, or that night. And my presentation that I can't show you was all of 2 slides, one with my name on it and another one with a photo of a young girl called Hineari, and Hineari is looking over the fence to where this proposed dam won't be. May I say confidently. And so I took a photo of her, and it's really nice. And I say, what does Hineare see? Wakamoiko Basin imprisoned behind concrete walls. Will she be damned in palms of progress? Suffocated in perpetual pipes of irrigating rhetoric? Sinking history? Reflooding hopes of different ways of being, all in the name of economic growth, ego-moronic growth, gentrifying Wairarapa into hollow shallows, shadows, ghosts. These valleys echo ancient wisdom from the tops of Tararua Maunga, yet will voices of reason drown in fallen gullies of political power, buried under generations of mistakes. Mistakes made by stagnant councils, private pyramids of hidden agendas, and entitled greed. Indigenous knowing bulldozed again and again. Will the secrets in this land reveal the true meaning of the resilience of water, regenerate faith in our ability to humble ourselves, not before nature, but as nature? Koe koe, koe koe. I am you. You are me. Or will the hazy white clouds of privilege precipitate a drought of wisdom? The same thinking will not lead us into what is life-giving. Will we hear her call, the karanga, reaching us through drying leaves, bypassing the roots of exotic trees? Will we remember from whom we descend, or watch the withering of mokopuna dreams? In whose hands does Hineare's future rest? Yep. That's me.
Fionna, wonderful presentation, thought-provoking for us all, I'm sure, and maybe challenging for some as well. Does anyone have any particular questions that they're wanting to ask any of our speakers?
One, where do you see the population in this, in the environment? Because what I see is that, as Pat White pointed out, we're small creatures, but there's a lot of us, and yet it seems to be the discussion that everybody avoids human overpopulation on our planet. And that doesn't mean standing shoulder to shoulder, that just means as a species we're outstripping all of our natural resources faster than we can replenish them. And yet there's no talk about it anywhere. It's solar power, it's this, it's electric cars, it's all the conveniences that we want, but nobody's talking about the elephant in the room, which is overpopulation, as far as I can see. I'd just like to know your thoughts on that.
The quickest and best way to bring down a population is to educate the young women. And you'll find, from the little reading I've done on the subject, you'll find that it was different parts of Africa where the education system was in place for girls and young women. It provided them options. It provided them options besides the traditional family structure, and it also gave them opportunities beyond that traditional structure, and it affected the population. So it's a matter of how do you implement and how you support those things. And that's all. More education.
If we're overpopulated, I say we get rid of all the greedy people.
It's only 1%.
Yeah, well, I don't know the numbers either, but I was up at, I was actually at the Wakamoiko stream today with a friend named Gary Foster, and he was telling me about the Matahiwi station, 3,000 acres, that station, and there's one family on it. I don't really think we're overpopulated. I just think we're not using our whenua right. That piece of land, that 3,000 acres, could essentially be a home to 3,000 people. If we knew how to take care of our resources, if we weren't so wasteful, and if we gave a shit about our people. Wena ki te mate, kia ora. We've lost our compassion, and that's what I felt through the lockdown, because the hum of society that I feel is spawned from the ego would drop. You know, that hum was just silenced. You could feel the compassion from the funeral.
Yeah.
You could feel that coming back. And if we connected with that, if we relearned how to speak nature, we would care again. And you could see that care coming out of people, right? So I'm not sure about the statistics on population, but I think we definitely need to be compassionate again, and share our feeling. I actually believe that's the way we're going to beat capitalism. I don't know how many people in the room are on the fight against capitalism, but it's that competitiveness. We need to rein that in. Stop being competitive and being caring. You know, we used to deal our currency, Māori, the currency in Te Ao Māori was mana. And you couldn't take mana, you couldn't buy it, you couldn't, work for you couldn't work for it. But, in our society today, in the Western society, we use money, it's a transaction, and we take, it's extractive economy. Back in the day, Indigenous communities, it was a giving economy. You had to give more than what someone gave you, and it kind of perpetuated this idea of caring for the common good. So probably not take up too much space.
I know during lockdown, during the first part of lockdown, when the town was properly locked down, I was working in the EOC, and I had a little letter to say I was able to walk the streets. And I was walking down Michael Street where I live, where I've lived for 23 years, and I heard a stream for the first time. So there's a little stream that comes from one side of the road, runs underneath the road, and then joins the Kurupuni stream, and I had never heard it. But I heard it every morning walking to work until we went to level 3. And it wasn't the cars coming up and down Michael Street that was stopping me hearing it. It was just the hum of the traffic in Chapel and Queen Street. That was enough just to kill the sound of the stream. Quite frightening. But it makes me wonder whether the panellists think that lockdown might have made a lot of people think about their relationship to the environment. And is it going to spark some change? Is it going to spark a change in the way that we think, not just about the environment, but about society as well?
I'd like to think so. I think the time spent, I mentioned that we have this physical structure that's built to fit us, and we have this time structure that's built a certain way, a certain amount of time towards these goals, towards your job, how you structure your day and your time, and to have that changed where you stay in your home, just even reassessing your home space, your relationships, the closest relationships, and what comes next, your relationships with, like you said, hearing the stream, hearing the birds. I read an article where people were wondering if birds were chirping louder during shutdown. But it was just a matter of we were being silent. And I think on a certain level, our society needs this, and we need to rethink. Policy change is a different thing, but it starts with, at least on a collective, a lot of people are given a chance to think about the structure of their daily life.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I came out of lockdown depressed. Literally, I was depressed because, when we went into lockdown, all these institutions started falling down around me, and I felt, wow, this is a dream come true. For any Indigenous activist, it's actually a dream come true. Social activist, environmental activist, this was a dream come true. And I was, had all these flowery ideas about how much the world's going to change. And then we came out, and far out, the speed, government's ready to boost the economy, and I'm like, fuck! I literally felt depressed for about 5 days coming out. And so it took me a while to build that up a bit more confidence and talking to others, and I put something on Facebook and people PM'd me and said, no, I'm feeling the same way. So I started thinking, okay, so there is a great number of us who are disillusioned by the powers that be, and I think that's the key thing, is if you understand the status quo, like I said before, is problematic, then that's a starting point for change, and collaboration is going to be the key. Unity is going to be the key. You know, I'm willing to work with anyone and put aside differences and things like that. The biggest thing the lockdown gave me, coronavirus gave me, was it kicked me in the ass and said to me, speak up, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to say what you know you have to say. I mean, if you feel it, you've got to say it. And if you hurt people, then tell them you're sorry. But tell them you're not sorry for what you said, because it was the truth. So that's what the biggest thing that the coronavirus did for me. It gave me a boost of confidence that we have to say something, because we are in the shit if we don't do something now. Never mind waiting for the authorities, because hey, we all know central government's not going to do anything until there's enough people saying the same thing.
Well, I can tell you, my job is a sales rep for Raihānia, which is a hose and sprinkler for any garden. And I predominantly rep into large box stores, like Mitre 10, Bunnings, etc. And we should take heart from this, that most of the green garden, vegetables especially, they can't keep up with demand from people. They can't keep up with it. So people are changing. I think coronavirus, this lockdown, has made people realise my food supply is not under my control and I need to change that. So take heart in that, there is a change. And you're absolutely right, politicians change nothing, but people change things. So I've been away.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to see bread makers selling out and seeds. I couldn't get any seeds from anywhere, and yeah.
I think there's been, I think all these matters are interrelated, that we see the United States of dystopia falling away into horrendous chaos, almost beyond belief. I think there's a correlation between the resurgence of Black Lives Matter activism. On the same hand, just across the ditch, we have a large mining company willfully destroying a 46,000-year-old cultural site. I mean, you would like to think that that wouldn't happen in New Zealand, but I'm not so sure that it wouldn't in the same circumstances. So how do we go about changing that? That requires a deeper resurgence, doesn't it?
Sometimes the thing that we're asked to look at is a shiny distraction. I mean, I think we have to understand what are the things that we really have to take on. And so there's an idea about the poison and noise. And so while there's a whole lot of noise going on, some of it just a distraction, how do we find poise so that we can address the things that need to be addressed, as opposed to going down rabbit holes that somebody set up for us to keep us distracted from the real imbalance that might come through a tipping point in critical mass.
Can you expand further on that, Rob? The coronavirus in the States has been aligned with a whole lot of distractions, including ones that you can't even describe if we call it Obamagate. And I don't know if that's a birth certificate or what that is. But the thing is that in the environment, if we understand where the tipping points are that go to extinction, that go to irreparable damage,
then actually while people are talking about a whole range of other things, we can be concentrating on the actual points that matter. But in the noise of everything, and people coming to you with their agendas set up by somebody who's distracting them, then you suddenly get taken away from those things that you should be looking to balance, should be thinking about the danger points, thinking about how to address them. And so what's the key to the, because you can describe this in science terms, but I don't actually think that's the way to describe it. And so I'm looking for a way that goes, when there's all of this noise around you, including data, what's the poise that you can have?
Can I expand on that, Brett? I own an acre of land. I don't own it. Bank owns it at the moment. And I find when I garden, I run on permaculture principles. Quiet moments, and Raz absolutely right. My mother told me a story. She was a singer in a choir in Belfast and went to Russia in the 1950s. And they played loud music through speakers all day long, 24 hours a day, in the streets to stop people thinking. And they do that here. You go into a supermarket, you hear that do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That's to stop you thinking. You get in your car, your iTunes is on straight away. It's to stop you thinking. All of this noise. When you find quiet moments, and I do it in the garden when I'm working, you have epiphanies. I was weeding in the garden one day and I realised that human beings will never be replaced by robots, because robots don't have discretionary spending. They need to keep us in that loop on the money so they get it all back again. And it's little things like that. It's the distractions, as Raz pointed out, all that noise, all those freaking passwords for computers, all of those things that are there to trap the mind, to stop you having your self-thoughts, to recognise racism isn't right. How can there be racism? We're all the same. We're all just people on this big rock hurtling through fucking space. And yet that's what they want us to do. They don't want us to have our self-truths.
Pat, would you like to make a comment?
In my experience in dealing with the environment is the ability to ask questions before we know something. That's about the main thing that I'd like to reiterate. That doesn't matter whether we know what's right, matters probably whether or not we're able to find out what's right by asking others. Pretty passive, I know, but there you go. Thanks.
I think a good starting point from that, of course, is recognising that we don't have all the answers. Recently I interviewed Anne Salmon about her book, Tears of Wairangi, and basically everything that Raihānia is saying and Ra is saying and Chris is saying and others are saying contained within her thought processes from just listening to traditional Māori knowledge and understanding, which I think Pat talked about in a brief way, and others have, about us not being above the nature, not above the environment, not above the world, and actually being an integral part of it, but just a part of it, not even a very important part of it. And it's, in a way, it's not even the failure of capitalism, it's the failure of greed, actually, is that we all want too much. If we all settled for less, we wouldn't even necessarily have to settle for a whole lot less, but if we all settled for less, or even if we all settled for not having more, we'd protect the environment a hell of a lot. Anything to say, anything to add to that, Kerri?
Actually, yeah, I do want, I guess, to reiterate something that I mentioned earlier. It's the idea of taking care of our environment is only so we can stay here a little bit longer. I think I mentioned the earth and everything on it. It will change, and the earth's always been changing, and things have gone away and new things have replaced it, and the idea of rebirth is, and is a huge part of this planet. There's always going to be a rebirth. And so it's in our best interest for us to behave. And just like you said, maybe it's just on not wanting much more. Or as we said earlier too, maybe it's not that we've overpopulated, but we're using our resources incorrectly. And the idea of sharing and the idea of redistributing so people can live and we're not tearing away at the resources.
I've said it many times before, and I still believe it. I think, you know, when the European empires went around the world disempowering and dispossessing indigenous people, it was the biggest plight on nature that we've ever seen. I truly believe that indigenous cultures hold the key to the salvation of the human race, because they knew how to speak nature. They knew how to, you know, we see ourselves as an extension of nature, as an expression of the gods from whom we all descend. You know, you talk about we can't see ourselves above nature. Well, that's just indigenous ways of knowing and being. I say that with humility, and I say that knowing that each individual in the room and all around the world have roots to indigenous cultures, and we all have roots to colonial cultures that suppress those indigenous cultures. Somewhere in our whakapapa, if you know your history, you will know you belong to the earth. But we have to be real about what's happened through imperialism and through colonisation. We have to be honest about that. We have to own that grief. If you hold it, the guilt, we have to have those conversations, you know, for our own benefit. So yeah, there's a whole lot of noise, but I think there's, you know, people are slowly coming to the realisation that we've done a whole lot of damage to the natural world. And indigenous people, again, just being an extension of that natural world, we have to include them into the ecosystems, into every ecosystem that we're a part of, whether that be permaculture, circular economies, some wrongs, some really critical wrongs of slave trade, you know, all these things that happened through the doctrine of discovery, 1493. We need to address these things and have honest, open conversations about them.
Does anyone else wish to contribute? I'm sure there must be a million ideas buzzing through everyone's head. Bert and I are having a staring contest. I'm trying to make
Just something that resonated with me was that all you have to do is to get a great cloud of hydrogen and you leave it for 4 billion years, leave it alone for 1 billion years. And it produces giraffes and roses and us.
I like how you put giraffes and us in the same.
might have been better to stop at the roses, actually.
I just want that for a lot of people, our concern about the environment and particularly climate change is about our survival. And, you know, I think looking back that in some extinctions, up to 97% of species on the earth have been lost. And so I really hope that I hope that for me, and I hope that for other people as well, it's not just about the survival of humans. Although I know people with children, you know, who fear for their children's future. And so for me, as somebody who recently turned 60, it's not so much about my survival. It's about these children. But it's also about the whole of the tile, you know, the whole of the environment, the birds, the seals, everything that's here with us that we're going to destroy through our capitalism and our consumerism. So for me it's beyond people. If we could just get people to stop so everything else would keep going, that would be good.
Mass suicide.
I have two sons. One of them recently had babies, so I have a 1-year-old grandson. And my other son, who's nearly 40-year-old gay man, said to me it was a disaster for his lifestyle because now he has to think about the future.
Yeah.
And he's had to change about how he lives. Because he thought before that it didn't matter, he wasn't going to have his genes continue.
Yeah.
And now it does matter.
When you're a parent, it's suddenly much harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess when I was talking about that, I was being a bit brutal, thinking that life will always continue. And so us acting as we are, I mean, we act on such a selfish basis. And there is something called species loneliness. And that is, as we've pushed the natural world away and constructed our way of living and our structure of time, we've also pushed away relationships, not just with the environment, but with the species of the environment. And, you know, when we're talking about knowledge of native cultures, and there was a different language and being of the earth, and there were relationships with the animals and with the plants that we've ignored now. It's a matter of, we have a lot of work to do, and what can we do one person at a time? What can we do in our own lives? And the lockdown provided a moment of silence for us all to think and to reevaluate these things. And hopefully that moment people will keep with them, and it will change how people respond and think about our personal relationships and our relationship with the environment, and what is the beauty in this life, and the importance. Like I said, it's beyond beauty. You can stop at beauty and be fine, but there's so much more that we need to acknowledge.
Yeah, I have a friend that believes that Rangi Nui and Papatuanuku don't really care about us because, I don't know why actually. Because we separated them through our tikuna tāne, separated them against their will. But I think, I disagree. I think we're here, that they wanted us to be here. The gods, they willed us here as extensions of themselves, as expressions of themselves, as manifestations of themselves. And when you really get to know who you are, you descend from the wind, you descend from, the trees and the sea, these things. So, yes, as a younger sibling to the trees and the birds and the animals, we've been little shits, Do they want us to die? If your younger sibling beat you up, would you want them to die? So for answers, I always look at our old stories and the way we see the world and try and find answers through the wisdom of our ancestors. And I just think, I think they'd probably prefer we didn't just go away and die. They'd prefer us to come back in line and act as a proper part of the family. But if failing that, then we will die. And I don't think we've got too much control over that, to be honest. What will be.
We can connect that with the idea of noise as well. When you're talking about the noise that prevents us from thinking, that noise also prevents the natural world. The comment, the birds chirping louder. No, they're actually communicating to each other at a normal level because they're not, the noise of human society has prevented a lot of animal communication and natural communication, and it affects how birds move, where they live, how they mate. The numbers are way down, and so that's another thing, is silencing of the human race. It puts these ideas on the table for a lot of people to think about who maybe wouldn't have thought about it beforehand, and that's a good part of it. And so it's just having an awareness and, what can we do as individuals or connect with people to push these ideas forward.
At the interface of nature and art, some of you will know that I'm breed a particular kind of iris, descend from a number of species in the west coast of North America, called Pacific Coast native irises, and there's a number of different species. There's an artist in Oregon who devoted his artistic pursuit to improving Pacific Coast irises. So they're an interesting case of man-driven change, because they have literally double in size, and the colour range has expanded exponentially, ruffling's been introduced, all the sort of things you would expect would happen in the domestication of a flower. George Gessert, the man in Oregon, was interested in trying to drive that evolution through art exhibitions, so he would breed irises, take them into the art gallery, and have the public vote on what irises should be bred with and what should not be bred with. And after a number of generations, he had completely changed the way the wild species looked. And he did something that horrified me at first, because it's against everything that I've been taught about ecology. He reintroduced them to the wild. And within 3 generations, all trace of his work had disappeared. The man-made influence had just disappeared. They weren't suitable for the environment. The things that he'd selected for weren't advantageous in the wild, and they just completely disappeared. So the point we make about life will carry on in one form or another, hopefully, not necessarily human life. That tends to suggest that that's likely to happen.
I think to see the arts as anything other than beautiful and metaphorical and inspiring to change would be a mistake. But I wouldn't like to see us throw out what you would refer to as Western science, because I think Chris's point that we feel so small and insignificant sometimes, especially up at the top of the Tararuas when there's a southerly, or at night when you can see, fortunately in this area, the stars so much, to actually feel that despite being so small, we have collectively, maybe because of numbers, maybe because of the way people live, we are having a rather dramatic influence. That's actually very hard for people, especially people who don't have that much control in their own life because of other things. They might think they're going to lose their employment tomorrow, or their children are having problems, or their mother has just died. They find it really difficult to understand that they're having this big effect on the planet. And I think only through art and music, many lyrics these days talking about climate change, talking about the planet, are actually ways of reinterpreting those like technical facts and helping motivate us. So I've really learned a lot from people's different perspectives, whether you were born here in your generation from Tanafa, or whether you've come across the Pacific and they're giving a new lens. So I think they're both useful ways of looking at the world. Thank you.
The proliferation of Zoom meetings has meant that we don't have to go so far. I'm not against Western science. I'm against some of the philosophies that have precipitated a lot of the statistics worldwide. That's what I'm against. Science in particular, because we're scientists as well, Indigenous people are scientists. I'm not against science. I think that it plays a massive role, and when we're all back living fluent and fluid with nature, I'm sure there'll be some great parts of Western technology that will help us.
So big thanks for coming out today. As you know, this was a level 2 event, so we had to restrict the audience. That's why we decided to film the event. So we will be uploading this onto YouTube and sharing it. So if you didn't quite catch everything, you'll be having that chance again. So big thanks to our sponsor, Carterton Creative Communities team. They allow us to thank our moderator and presenters. So I'd like to present a small gift. Gareth, thank you very much. Thank you.